Hello, I'm Bernard Hickey from Interest.co.nz and welcome to another in our series of double shot interviews where we speak to a CEO or a minister or someone out there who's got a view on the economy, interest rates, property, housing, whatever it is. And today we welcome Peter Dunne, the Inland Revenue Minister and the leader of the United Future Party, into Interest.co.nz to talk about tax, which we love to talk about. Today we've got the details from the budget going through the system. What do you think the changes around property taxation, what effect will they have on the property market?
I think they will achieve what we were after, which was some dampening of the demand, some removal of the distortion. But what we didn't want to do was completely kill off property as an investment for obvious reasons. So that is why we ended up making the changes in the area of depreciation. We rejected some of the more dramatic solutions like capital gains, land tax, RFRM, etc. I think that the changes to depreciation rules and also the work we're doing on LAQCs and QCs, which effectively will see them treated under the current partnership rules in the longer term, will achieve the objective we want, both in terms of dampening the demand but also raising the revenue to help pay for the tax cuts.
Can you explain how the changes in the LAQC rules will work?
Well, we're consulting publicly on those at the moment, and there are some issues that have arisen regarding the scope of potential change, the impact. There's two groups, there's the LAQCs and the QCs, and the impact on both. Our ambition at this stage is to have that process completed in time for legislation being introduced later in this year to take effect from the 1st of April next year. So it's a little bit of a movable feast at this stage. There are some issues arising about the scope of the change and in particular some of the perhaps unintended consequences, but we'll address those as we go through the...
What are the people saying about those unintended consequences?
Oh, it's the question of we understand what you're doing with property, but what about the situation where, for instance, my LAQC is not property related? Now, there are two schools of thought. One says, well, how do you separate them out? The other says, well, hang on, this was our primary objective. If we're bringing in some other business activity, we may need to look at just how those rules are applied. And that's a bit of an ongoing debate internally. As I say, the starting point was when you looked at the depreciation changes and the LAQC changes, we felt they were sufficient both in terms of the policy objective but also in terms of raising the revenue with the GST increase to match the tax cuts.
The budget said that the LAQC changes would add about $70 million of revenue in the first year. Is that enough? Are the changes enough to actually make an impact?
I think they are. I think you've got to look at what we have at the moment. We've got around 130,000 LAQCs. We've got accumulated tax losses from memory over the last 8 years of around $2.3 billion. So I think that, if you like, tipping the equation a little bit and starting to see some more rigour introduced into the way in which the LAQCs themselves are run will help achieve the objective. But at this stage, is this the forerunner to other things? No, it's not intended to be. We'll see how this beds down and then have a look and see whether other changes are required. But explicitly ruled out were capital gains, land tax, RFRM. We looked very hard at the bright line test.
What was the thinking there? Because there was some talk.
Well, there was some talk about it. I guess with both the bright line test and, for a matter of fact, as well, the issue of whether we abolished the ring fencing of losses provisions was a very pragmatic consideration. Did we need to? Did we need to in terms of the construct of the overall package? And the conclusion that we came to was no, we didn't.
What's your view as a leader of United Future on whether we should bring in a bright line test and perhaps strengthen up those ring fencing provisions?
From a United Future perspective, we were very wary of any moves in that direction, have been historically, and weren't really satisfied that we needed to do so at this stage. If you looked at what we've got for property with the changes to depreciation, the changes coming around LAQCs, the cuts in the personal tax rates, the rise in the GST, the moves on GST Phoenix-related schemes, we think that's a sufficiently robust property package, and for the time being, I think that's adequate.
And what's your position on capital gains tax?
Historically, United Future has opposed capital gains tax on property transactions and will continue to do so.
Now, there is a broad debate about how you change tax rules and how you operate them. there is a theory that you could go for a very simple and broad tax system where you don't spend so much time trying to chase people through the courts, you just allow the system to work. And that would, in theory, mean a lot of tax lawyers and accountants and consultants who are there at the moment constructing all sorts of vehicles to avoid tax don't have to be there. Or you could leave the current system in place and then task the IRD to go after people a lot tougher. And in the last couple of years, with a variety of cases, we've seen the Trinity tax case around forestry, Penny and Hooper, the results out in the last couple of weeks, and various other cases, and obviously the bank case as well, that the IRD has been very aggressive and has pushed hard. What's your feeling on which way we should go? Do we go for more aggressive litigation and targeting, or do we go for a broader, simpler?
I think it's actually a combination of both. I think at the grand level it's broader, simpler, making the system much easier to comply with, much more understandable, and the changes that we're foreshadowing in terms of the administration of the system, the move to a more online electronic model, is really part of that, so that essentially, if you put it very, very simply, your computer talks to our computer and the rest of us get on with life. On the other hand, the issue about enforcement, what the Commissioner has been doing, in my view, over the last few years, has been going, you say aggressively pursuing cases, and that may be so, but I think it's more a case of going after the obvious excesses. In 2007, Michael Cullen and I decided to put another $14 million into IRD's resources at that time to pursue certain property transactions. The return from that was significant, 6- or 7-fold in terms of assessments. That's what lay behind the decision in this year's budget to increase over the next 4 years by nearly $120 million the audit resources available to the department, and we're looking there to raise from that about $750 million. So it's a combination of carrot and stick, if you like. Make the system simpler, more easily able to be complied with by taxpayers at all levels, and then send the signal that we're after those who aren't paying.
Isn't this a bit depressing, though, that we're having to employ all these extra people to chase down tax cheats? Wouldn't it be simpler just to have a broader system?
Well, in the longer term, of course, I think the impact of the changes that are being made will lead to that broader, simpler system. But in the meantime, there's still a fair amount of, I don't like this phrase, but I can't think of a better one in the context, low-hanging fruit out there to be grabbed. And there's also, and I think this is one of the things that's come through very strongly since the budget, a very strong sense among New Zealanders that their sort of basic fairness is being infringed upon by people who are seen to be getting away with it. So when we've gone out there and talked about the fact we're giving the IRD more resources to crack down on tax avoidance and abuse, etc., there's been a quite spontaneous positive response. And I think the balance we're striking is that people will put up with things like the GST going up to pay for tax cuts if they see that those who are rorting the system are being held to account. So it's quite a fine balance.
Now, the other big change in the tax system coming up is the increase in the GST from October. What sort of unintended consequences or transitional issues are you seeing so far as you move closer to that date?
I think the biggest group of issues are around the fact that institutional knowledge is not there for what to do with the GST change. When GST came in 1986, there was the GST office that went through a very prolonged period of public and business education beforehand. It didn't happen in 1989 because the change was effected within a 6-week period with just sort of almost a blitzkrieg approach. So here we are in 2010. A lot of people think that this is a relatively simple transition, and then as they start to look at it, there are issues about pre and post 1 October, returns that overlap that period, quite a number of things. So for that reason, I set up a GST advisory panel which has representatives from retailers, Business New Zealand,